Let's dive right in. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're going to uncover this completely invisible yet incredibly vulnerable link between global energy security and, well, the pills sitting right now in your medicine cabinet. Seriously, think for a second about the sheer volume of medications we consume globally every single day. I mean, billions of doses, managing everything from mild headaches to severe heart disease. We kind of just take for granted that they'll always be there, right? We usually talk about oil in terms of gasoline for our cars, or, the plastics wrapping our food. But today, we're looking at a downstream industry that literally affects the fundamental survival of billions of people. The pharmaceutical crisis hiding inside the petrochemical crisis is an imminent threat, and honestly, almost nobody is preparing for it.
So how does an oil war actually cause a medicine shortage? It sounds like a massive jump in logic, doesn't it? When you're standing in that sterile, brightly lit aisle of your local pharmacy, grabbing a bottle of ibuprofen, you feel completely insulated from geopolitical disruptions happening thousands of miles away in the Middle East. But actually, that feeling of insulation, it's a total illusion. And that's exactly the core mystery we're solving today. We're going to map out how an energy choke point creates a massive healthcare choke point, bridging that seemingly impossible gap between an oil tanker and your prescription pad.
Let's ground this in reality right off the bat. Lagos, Dhaka, Manila. We aren't just talking about abstract supply chain theories plotted on some whiteboard. An oil dispute in the Gulf could trigger severe, life-threatening medicine shortages in these exact cities, and honestly, across the entire developing world. Now, why these specific places? Well, developing nations don't typically rely on those incredibly expensive, brand-name specialty drugs. Their healthcare systems survive almost entirely on the mass production of generic medicines. So when the global pipeline gets squeezed, these vital hubs for generic distribution are absolutely the first dominoes to fall. They're going to experience the devastating impact on generic drug availability way before wealthier nations even notice a slight price bump. To understand why this happens, we have to trace the supply chain all the way back to its beating heart.
Section 1. The hidden connection. China's role as the world's pharmacy.
Right, so China is the world's largest producer of generic drugs and active pharmaceutical ingredients. But here's the kicker. To actually manufacture these medicines, they are locked into an absolute dependence on petrochemical inputs. Let's break down this anatomy of dependency so we can see just how deep it goes. First up, solvents for formulation. You can't just mix raw medicinal powders with water and call it a day. Industrial solvents are absolutely required to extract, synthesize, and formulate those active ingredients into a usable drug format. Next, we have intermediates for drug molecules. These are synthetic petroleum-derived molecules that serve as the fundamental, non-negotiable building blocks for hundreds of different medications. You literally cannot build the drug without them. And finally, plastics. We're talking medical-grade plastics for blister packs to keep pills sterile and for IV bags that hold life-saving fluids. Without these petrochemical inputs, the whole manufacturing process doesn't just slow down, it completely grinds to a halt.
And that brings us to naphtha. Think of naphtha as the literal bloodstream of the generic drug industry. By definition, it's a flammable liquid derived from petroleum distillation, and it's absolutely essential for creating the solvents and plastics we just talked about. It starts out as this dark, thick crude oil extracted from the earth, and through refining, it's distilled into this highly specific, critical liquid block. It is the physical bridge connecting massive energy tankers floating out in the ocean to that pristine, sterile blister pack handed to you in a hospital room. So whenever we discuss the solvents and plastics required for pharmaceuticals, we are essentially talking about naphtha-derived chemicals. If the flow of naphtha stops, the heartbeat of global medicine stops right along with it.
Moving on to Section 2, the supply squeeze, competing for dwindling feedstocks.
Because of the recent closure of the Strait of Hormuz, petrochemical feedstock supplies have tightened up dramatically worldwide. Now, the pharmaceutical industry is facing the exact same input squeeze as the general plastics manufacturing industry. But think about the brutal economic trade-off happening behind the scenes here. If there is an extremely limited amount of raw petrochemicals available on the open market, who gets it? Does it go to producing highly lucrative consumer packaging, or does it go to producing low-margin generic drugs? It's a harsh economic reality that puts healthcare at a massive disadvantage during a supply squeeze. A standard plastic shortage means, well, your Amazon delivery gets delayed or your favorite beverage comes in a different bottle. But a pharma shortage? That means delayed patient treatment. Millions of patients simply don't get their medicine. It is a literal life-or-death scenario stemming from the exact same bottleneck, and sadly, those low-margin generics usually lose the bidding war.
The numbers on this are pretty staggering. Historically, 41% of China's refined product imports, which crucially include naphtha and those essential petrochemical feedstocks, came directly from the Middle East. Today, that number has completely collapsed to less than 1%. Now, you might be wondering, well, why don't manufacturers just buy it from somewhere else? The reality is alternative replacement sources like Russia or the US just cannot magically fill a massive 40% void overnight. Refining capacity and shipping logistics, they take years of infrastructure to optimize. So this sudden collapse effectively cuts off the very lifeblood that the global pharma industry relies on to maintain its massive volume of production.
Section 3. A global health threat. The scale of the risk.
$100 billion. That is the annual value of China's pharmaceutical exports. To truly wrap your head around the scale of this, you have to contextualize what $100 billion in generic drugs actually looks like. Because generic drugs are incredibly cheap, we're talking literally pennies per pill, this figure represents an astronomical, almost incomprehensible volume of actual pills and raw chemical ingredients flowing out to the world. They're producing the bulk ingredients consumed across Asia, Africa, Latin America, and honestly, increasingly the US and Europe too. This export pipeline isn't just some massive economic driver. It serves as a critical daily lifeline. Any disruption here causes a catastrophic impact on generic drug availability worldwide.
It is absolutely crucial to understand exactly what kinds of treatments are on the line here. We aren't talking about niche, experimental, specialty drugs used by a tiny fraction of the population. No, we're looking at essential medicines, the absolute foundation of modern healthcare. Antibiotics to fight deadly infections, antivirals, cardiovascular drugs that millions of people rely on every single day just to prevent heart attacks, oncology treatments for cancer patients who simply do not have the luxury of waiting around, and insulin precursors. Just imagine the devastating reality of a supply disruption forcing hospitals to ration insulin. These are the drugs that keep modern society functioning on a daily basis. And, as we're seeing, their availability is directly tied to the uninhibited flow of global oil.
So, when does this actually hit the consumer? Let's look at the timeline of disruption. Right now, in the present, the Hormuz closure has severely tightened those feedstocks. But supply chains always have a built-in lag. There are national stockpiles, inventory buffers at the plants, giant cargo ships taking weeks to cross the ocean. It takes time for the delay to travel from the oil refinery all the way to your pharmacy shelf. However, if replacement sources aren't secured and these petrochemical shortages persist into Q3 of 2026, those buffers are going to run completely dry. By Q4 of 2026, pharmaceutical production cuts become highly likely. The crisis is already in motion right now. We're essentially just waiting for the shockwave to finally hit.
I really want to hit the nail on the head with this point. The impending crisis isn't a lack of medicinal plants or chemical knowledge. Honestly, there are enough raw chemical ingredients out there to treat the whole world. The real crisis is this complete, unyielding dependence on petrochemical inputs. Without the naphtha-based solvents required to actually formulate those raw ingredients into an absorbable pill, and without the plastics required to safely package and distribute them without contamination, the whole manufacturing apparatus just grinds to a halt. The core issue is that the shortage isn't the drug ingredients themselves, it's the solvents and the packaging that actually make the drugs possible to consume.
Health security and energy security are connected. I think this quote perfectly captures what we're talking about today. When you disrupt the flow of energy, you disrupt the flow of health. An oil war in the Gulf doesn't just dictate the price of a gallon of gas, it actively empties medicine cabinets in Dhaka and Manila. It means the solvents needed to formulate a child's fever reducer, or the plastic needed for a grandfather's IV bag, are trapped in the exact same crude oil that isn't flowing through Hormuz right now. It means that an energy war is, effectively and inevitably, a healthcare war.
So I want to leave you with this question. If our most basic, life-saving medicines fundamentally rely on vulnerable oil choke points halfway around the world, just how fragile is modern healthcare? We've taken quite a journey today, right? From the block shipping lanes of the Strait of Hormuz to the massive generic manufacturing plants of China, and finally straight to the blister pack in your own hand. The layers of generic drug production reveal this deep, honestly kind of unsettling reliance on a really volatile commodity. Think about that interconnected fragility the next time you pop a pill. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope this helped illuminate some of the hidden vulnerabilities woven deeply into our world.